One of the biggest things that jumps out at me from these headlines is that the U.S. dollar had its biggest weekly drop in months,
Yeah.
which is pretty wild.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
And on the flip side of that, France's borrowing costs are now almost as high as Greece's.
Oh, yeah. That's a sign of trouble for sure.
Yeah, that's not a good sign.
The unraveling of some of those trade deals from a few years back, that's really adding a lot of uncertainty to the global trade picture. And that's definitely putting some downward pressure on the dollar. And, when the dollar weakens, other currencies tend to strengthen.
Makes sense.
And then with France, they've got their own set of problems politically,
Yeah.
economically. I mean, it's just making it way more expensive for them to borrow money,
Yeah. That tracks. You know what's interesting, though? The Japanese yen is actually rallying.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy because the Bank of Japan, for years now, has been all about keeping interest rates super low.
Yeah, they've been really committed to that.
But now suddenly there's all this talk about a potential rate hike.
It seems like maybe even Japan's getting to a point where those ultra-low interest rates just aren't sustainable anymore. Maybe it's inflation finally starting to become a real problem, or maybe they're worried about the yen weakening too much. Whatever the reason, it really shows that, even the most steadfast policies, they can change when the global economic picture shifts.
Yeah, for sure. So, speaking of shifting, let's zoom out a little bit and look at the kind of overall global economic picture.
Okay, yeah.
And we've got some interesting contrasts here. For example, in the U.S., online sales were through the roof during Thanksgiving.
Oh, wow.
Which, I guess that's not too surprising.
Yeah, I guess not.
But over in Germany, retail sales were actually a big disappointment.
Huh.
Even though their employment numbers are strong. What do you make of that?
Well, it's a mixed bag.
Right.
The U.S. consumer seems to be holding up pretty well, at least for now. But, there are definitely some warning signs in Europe, especially places like Germany. I mean, Germany is an export powerhouse. So if retail sales are weak there, it could be a sign that a broader economic slowdown is coming.
Makes sense. And then there's China.
Ah, yes, the ever enigmatic China.
Always a wild card. On the one hand, their exports are booming. But on the other hand, their property market is a mess. Land sales are plummeting.
It's really a tricky situation to figure out. They're trying to balance their economic growth with some, honestly, pretty serious structural problems in their economy. And their property market, that's been a major driver of growth for years.
Right.
But it's also become a source of a lot of risk.
For sure. And of course, we can't forget about inflation, which seems to be rearing its head everywhere.
Inflation, the unwelcome guest at every party.
The Eurozone is above its target, and even Tokyo's core inflation is rising.
And especially with those energy subsidies starting to fade, it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, that's not a good sign. So does this mean interest rate hikes are basically inevitable at this point?
Well, central banks around the world are in a very tricky position. They have to keep inflation under control, but if they raise rates too quickly, they could trigger a recession. So it's a real balancing act. And we're seeing some really interesting policy shifts happening. Like in Australia, the Reserve Bank is actually undergoing some pretty big reforms. And with the Bank of Japan maybe joining the rate hike party, it really does feel like the era of easy money is coming to an end.
Yeah. The end of an era. All right, let's take a quick detour into the world of geopolitics. What's going on there?
Okay, let's see. Well, it looks like China's in the headlines again.
Oh, shocker.
They're warning the U.S. about tightening those chip export controls that we talked about last time.
Right.
But at the same time, they're also extending tariff exemptions on some American goods. What do you think their game is here?
I don't know. It's a little confusing.
It's like a balancing act, They want to protect their own tech industry, but they also don't want to completely destroy trade relations with the U.S.
Right.
But, we're also seeing them flex their muscles a little bit in the South China Sea. It's a reminder that economic power and geopolitical ambitions tend to go hand in hand.
Makes sense. Okay, before we wrap up, I want to talk about how companies are navigating all of this craziness.
Yeah, it's a wild world out there for businesses.
So we've got Canada suing Google.
What?
Yeah, for anti-competitive practices. But then at the same time, the EU is proving this massive airline merger.
Oh, wow.
So it seems like every industry is facing its own unique challenges right now. What do you see as the big trends there?
Well, for one thing, Chinese EV makers are starting to face some headwinds in Europe as those tariffs start to loom.
Makes sense.
And then you've got Volkswagen workers who are potentially going on strike. It's a reminder that businesses, whether they're big or small, they've got to constantly adapt to this constantly changing world.
Yeah. So as we come up for air from this deep dive, it's clear that the global macro landscape is anything but calm. We've got currencies going haywire, economic uncertainties, central banks trying to figure out what to do, and geopolitical tensions simmering everywhere.
I think the key takeaway here is that all these trends are all interconnected. What happens in one part of the world can really have a huge impact on other parts of the world. So the question for you, the listener, is which of these trends is going to affect you the most in the coming months? I mean, will it be the dollar's volatility messing with your travel plans? Will it be rising inflation eating away at your budget?
Mm.
Or maybe those geopolitical tensions are going to start affecting the availability of some of your favorite products?
Yeah, definitely something to think about. Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive.
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, right?
It really does. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back soon with more insights to help you navigate this crazy world we live in.
See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.